Hi, everyone. It's Ryan Fowler here with my good friend Tim Costello, and we started without Jordan, and then you just barely came on. So great timing, Jordan.
I knew it.
Welcome to the show. We got a great, very interesting show today. Part of me kind of likes talking about this topic. Maybe I like getting pissed off, but we actually have 3 clips today. We got 2 short ones, and then Matt Walsh with the Daily Wire did about a 22-minute rant supported by quite a bit of data about ADHD and how it's a total scam. I'm not convinced it's a total complete scam, but I am convinced I have a brother with ADHD, and I am convinced that the over medication of Adderall, Ritalin, etc., and the harmful effects it have is just epidemic and tragic and probably criminal if there was a law against it, which there absolutely should be. So we're going to dive into that today. We're going to look at some, we're just going to look at how corrupt the medical and scientific industry is. And science is awesome. I mean, science is what brought us out of the dark ages. The scientific method is probably the greatest discovery of all time. It's way the heck up there. It's led to so much good. So I'm not anti-science. I'm anti-corruption in science. And the corruption has just grown to massive proportions now. And there's still a lot of good science out there. But anything that gets corrupted or messed up or that's used for evil needs to be addressed. So we're going to dive into that today. It'll be very informative for you guys. We got facts and figure. We got several PhDs and whatnot, or at least a few. They're going to be talking on this very subject today, not just Matt Walsh. We got 3. So we're going to dive in. But before we get to that, welcome to the show, Jordan, and welcome to the show, Tim. Where are you broadcasting from, Tim?
I'm broadcasting from my car in Roscommon, Michigan.
Nice. And you're at the diamond baiting conference with your wife, and so
that's correct.
We really appreciate you coming on, taking the time out of your busy schedule. And so introduce yourself, Tim, and then Jordan.
I'm Tim Costello with Tim Costello Hypnosis, and take today's topic with a little bit of caution in that we are not saying that every single instance of ADHD or whatever you want, ADD, whatever you want to call it, is a scam. What we're saying is the over medication of so many people who may or may not even really fall into that category, participate in this, and you will see the results of what happens when you over medicate a population. Now, when I was a kid and going to school back in the 60s, grade school, I think I hit 67. I started first grade. There was no ADHD. There was no kindergarten. There was no Ritalin. None of this kind of stuff was going on. But we always had 1 or 2 kids in the grade who were considered hyperactive because they were just always fidgeting and moving around. It wasn't the whole population of the class. It was 1 or 2 out of 60 or 80 kids in that particular grade. So we have gone from that to present day where literally half the children in the classroom are on some type of medication to get them to focus or behave. So take into consideration, we are not negating the existence of ADHD. We're saying the over-medication is the issue. Thank you. Jordan, go to you.
Go ahead, Jordan. Thank you, Tim.
No, Mike.
Welcome to the show, Jordan. He's getting there. We got a short clip to play. How about we? Oh, there you go.
There you go.
There we go. Sound okay?
Yep.
All right. All right. Let's try this. So I'm Jordan Kurtz, and I watched all the clip last night, Ryan. You can hear Matt Walsh's frustration. I think, and his frustration is primarily over the misdiagnosis of this stuff. He's going to give an analogy where he's like, oh, all these scientists are miraculously amazed when children are more excited to eat ice cream than their broccoli. And what he's alluding to is that this study is like oh, scientists discover that kids get bored and don't want to pay attention to a math video, but they're happy to pay attention to Star Wars. And so he's kind of making fun of these institutions that are coming through with these groundbreaking studies about kids that just get bored. And so that was my biggest takeaway from the video.
So to a degree, well, not with ADHD, but with mental health, I have been through the system. I've been on, in the past, clinically diagnosed, bipolar type 2, severe depression, actually extreme. My depression, there's actually like 5-6 different categories, from borderline to mild to moderate, severe, extreme. I was extreme depression, mild mania, bipolar type 2, general anxiety disorder, mild to moderate, or mild Asperger's. And I've taken probably over a dozen anti-anxiety, antidepressant medications. I have a brother who was medicated for hyperactivity, and he's kind of pissed now as an adult because of how it affected him. And there's a lot of interesting facts going to come out. Ritalin is similar to cocaine, and Adderall is very similar to methamphetamine, and the effects and the downsides, there's over 5,000 people who have died, and on their death certificate, cause of death is Ritalin. That's a fact. Look it up. So we really want to shed some light on these crazy medications, and maybe someone is ADHD. All right, should that be the best solution? Putting them on something that's basically low dose cocaine, low dose meth, So with that said, we're going to play a couple quick clips. And again, the point today, and we got a lot of comments. I'm going to start diving into the comments. The point today is not that we're anti-science. We're anti-corruption in science. We're here's a hypothesis that's untested. Now let's launch a multi-billion-dollar SSRI campaign. Here's another one that's untested. Let's put half the kids on Ritalin and turn them into an annuity payment for the pharmaceutical industry. It's ridiculous. So we're going to dive into that. But listen, psychologists do some good in the world. I did 100 sessions over 15 years. It did fix about 60% of my depression. It didn't fix any of the anger, didn't fix any of the anxiety, some of the other stuff I was going through. It fixed a tiny bit of the anger. The last few years did nothing. And then I found I still had a huge chunk of depression, and my depression was very bad. But I'm not going to lie and say it didn't help at all. It did. So let's get to all sorts. Zoramina, welcome to the show. And actually, man, we just got a lot of people commenting. Mr. Hold on. I'm using a laptop, and this mouse is a little wonky. The new next, how you doing? New next, Mr. Wrong. And let's see, P-Dubs, welcome to the show. Longtime listener, P-Dubs. And comment already. Adderall is not similar to meth. Adderall has one component different from meth. It's otherwise identical. And you can look it up, my man. Similar, to amphetamine. Well, the reason it's amphetamine, not methamphetamine, is a very tiny difference in the molecule, but it actually is functionally similar to methamphetamine. It has the same effects, or almost identical effects, almost identical downsides. So it's not a major component. I absolutely disagree with that. But hey, agree to disagree. So all right. Well, we do appreciate your comments, however. I'm going off of what my research shows, and I have taken the time to do the research. So there's a one molecule difference, or one atom difference between methamphetamine and amphetamine, and the effects. Now, Adderall is much lower dose than meth normally take, so we'll acknowledge that. But otherwise, very similar to methamphetamine, and Ritalin is very similar to cocaine. They are chemically very similar. But moving on to the rest of our show, thank you for your comments, Mr. Long. Appreciate them. moving on, we're going to start before we get into the Matt Walsh component with a couple quick clips. And it's just going to highlight there's a lot wrong with universities today. I think a lot of people know that. There's a lot wrong with scientists who are trying to get funding for their projects. Again, not all scientists are bad. A lot of them are good. But there are some issues with the system today. Before we dive in, Tim, Jordan, do you have anything you'd like to add? I'm going to play the short with Neil deGrasse, and then I'll go to Dr. Terabins. But do you guys have anything, or you just want to play the clip?
No, I said it earlier. So
okay.
Yeah, me too. Let's just roll with it.
All right. So let me cue this first one up, and we'll just play this and then discuss, because and so I'm not sure. It's Neil deGrasse Tyson and
Helfand.
David Helfand. And we'll just play and then we'll discuss. Here we go.
Some years ago, did a study.
The biochemical company.
Right. And they took 53 studies that were not just published in peer-reviewed journals. This was on looking for cancer drugs.
Okay.
53 studies, not just published, but highlighted in the editorials of the issue of the journal they were in as potential major breakthroughs. And they put a whole bunch of people on it, put a whole bunch of money in it, tried to reproduce them. 89% of those studies were irreproducible.
So just to be clear for people to know when a scientist uses the word irreproducible, that doesn't mean they couldn't figure out the experiment. It means they did the experiment, but did not get the same results. That's what irreproducible means.
This is a problem. Just recently, very energetic psychologist rounded up a couple hundred of his colleagues and tried to reproduce 100 and some, I forget how many there were, experiments that have been published in behavioral psychology.
Okay.
Of order, half of them could not be reproduced.
Half of them couldn't be reproduced.
Okay, so a hallmark of science is that you can reproduce the experiment. What goes on in our scientific community today is universities pressure their scientists to make discoveries, to make breakthroughs. They're professors, which many are scientists. And what they're finding out is most of the experiments cannot be reproduced. And these are experiments that are published in peer-reviewed, like gold standard peer-reviewed publications. And it's called the replication crisis. And it calls into question what the hell is going on with the scientific community. So it was 100 experiments exactly they tried to reproduce, these psychologists. The reason they tried to reproduce it is there was a scientist who used top tier methods, the strictest controls possible, to demonstrate that people have low level ESP, low level psychic ability. And by the way, what's really interesting is this experiment has been reproduced. This is one of the ones that has been replicated multiple times successfully. But when it came out, other scientists could not believe that we have low-level psychic ability. And so they said, well, wait a second. They're using all these top-tier methods. They're showing this result that we don't believe. So we need to dig in and find out what's going on. And that led them to doing this study and saying, well, geez, if this could get through all the rigmarole, which we believe is bullcrap, what else happened? And so then they had these top psychologists try and reproduce 100 of the top studies, like published in the highest gold standard publication with the strictest controls. They could only reproduce 36. So 74% of the experiments they could not reproduce, which leads to the question, are that 74% bullcrap? Well, based on scientific method, yeah, 74% is bullcrap. There's something wrong there. The 36% they could reproduce, the effect that was in the original study on average was only half as high in the reproduced study. And it begs the question, what are these scientists doing? And I'll tell you something else. AI has come out, and this is a big issue. It's not just this. He just talked about 53 other scientific studies, not even psychology. They could not reproduce 89%. And they've actually used AI to retest a lot of these experiments or look for signs of fraud. And there's been over 10,000 published scientific experiments retracted because the AI found fraud in 10,000 peer-reviewed published scientific experiments. So there's an epidemic going on in the scientific community of fraud or corruption or something. And it's a mess right now. And because of COVID and all this other stuff that happened, well, hope that doesn't kill us because it's algorithms. The beer bug. The public rightfully, much of the public, not all, but much rightfully, is suspicious of the medical community, and they absolutely should be, because there are signs of epidemic, systemic, rampant fraud and corruption in this industry, and we're going to dive in more. So I'm going to play the Dr. Ryan Terabine clip. It's about a 2-minute clip, guys. You want to set up or any comments on this clip before we go into anything further?
Well, just by contrast to that, you've had...
That's my take. Let's see what Jordan says.
Well, but just by contrast to that, about all these things that are irreproducible, Ryan, Tim and I use the methods that Ryan has been using with great reproducibility. It's not just Ryan that figured something out and saying all this stuff works. 2 of his hypnotists regularly retest the same
over and over and over
again, and have consistent, permanent, high quality results. So
90% of what we do, you will find a very competent hypnotist using. There's some extra stuff that really supercharges it, but what we do has been shown to be effective for decades and decades.
Yeah, we're using methods. So let me just throw down on the irreproducibility.
Okay.
What that means is, so we're saying is that people, other scientists, they were able to set up the experiment with all of the same controls, because these experiments are tremendously well documented. It's not a mystery to perform, and as long as you have the equipment, the experiment. The non-reproducibility that we're talking about means that I couldn't get the exact same results that the initial experiment produced. So even though I performed the experiment exactly like the previous scientist, my results were different. Case in point, and I'll make a real easy one here. Let's say we're going to make Jell-O, and I come up with a scientific method of taking gelatin and just the right amount of heat with a little bit of flavoring, a little bit of sugar, and this amount of water, and I produce this jiggly substance that we call Jell-O, and it tastes a little bit like cherry. And then Ryan takes that exact same recipe, exact same heat application, and does that again. He produces Jell-O. So now in a scientific method, both of us know how to produce Jell-O. Jordan comes along, does the exact same experiment, and produces Jell-O. So now we have 100% reproducibility for making Jell-O. If any one of those things are changed, such as Jordan's brother come along, if a brother even exists, and he says, I'm just going to use half the amount of gelatin that Jordan did, and I'm going to make this Jell-O again. So his brother does all these kind of things, uses half the amount of gelatin, and doesn't produce Jell-O. He produces red water. Okay, he didn't do the experiment correctly, so he did not get the same results, but he also didn't do the same experiment. That is what the scientific method is all about. You can't alter the initial experiment. It has to be exact with all the controls that Ryan mentions. And then we could publish this in the Bill Cosby Journal of Jell-O Gold Standard Medical Journal. and everybody will know how to make Jell-O around the world. So that's what we're talking about here. And Ryan was referring to the irreproducibility. When you have 100 peer-reviewed experiments, and all of a sudden you can't reproduce 74% of them, I'm more suspect about the other 26 than I am the 74 that didn't produce the results. And I'm probably going to jive back into there to see what happened.
Yeah, so, I messed up my math at 64%.
It's okay. The math isn't important. What's important is the irreproducibility of it all. So that's what we're talking about, which proves our point that ADHD is not a scam. That's sort of a clickbait kind of title, right? But the over-medication, over-diagnosing and then medication of this particular thing has gotten out of control, and that's what we're talking about.
There are some corrupt and fraudulent elements there, but Matt does like to sensationalize. Yes, I don't think he's sensationalizing too much, but maybe a little. By the way, thank you, New Next. I won't see his real name, but he did do a session with me, and you just made my day, brother.
There you go, man. That's what it's about.
We've gotten results like this several hundred times, maybe approaching 1,000 times between the three of us now. So probably around 1,000 if you include all three. Yeah, we get it all day, every day. We cannot help 100%, but it's significantly more than 90%. It's like 92, 96, somewhere around there. Of people come to us and we can help them, and they get results like the New Next. And that makes my day, man, because that's why we do this. We do this to help people.
Yep.
And absolutely. So he's been a lot of triggers that he used to get triggered at are gone. That's freaking amazing. By the way, Mr. Wrong, there is a chance you're right. I researched the topic out first, and maybe you're right, maybe I'm wrong about the whole methamphetamine.
I think that comment.
I don't think I'm wrong, but I might be.
Yeah, I think that comment goes with something else.
Yeah. Oh,
the fraud he was talking about.
Yeah.
Right.
So let's see. That's crazy. Found that much fraud. Shouldn't be shocked. So there is when economic pressure to get a certain result or to produce is at play. When money or politics comes into play, there's always going to be corruption, unfortunately. We need more controls. We need to fix the system somehow to minimize that, because right now the system lets corruption run rampant, and it's not all straight up corruption. There is some human error, and there is an explanation that if there's 100 experiments done and 98 fail to show any results, and then 2 show results, those 2 get published, but it's possible that there's just some straight up error in those 2. And it could be the 98 experiments, some of the ones that failed were done wrong, and there actually was something there. So some of this is just kind of how the system's set up that allows some natural bias to come in. But when go on the YouTube channel, Soft White Underbelly, there's a whistleblower about the pharmaceutical industry. An insider talks about that. There absolutely is rampant corruption, but I do want to be as accurate as possible. Some of it is human error. So, yeah, a lot of fraud. So the AI that found 10,000 peer-reviewed publications that actually went through the data, it did not redo the experiments. It just found elements of fraud in the 10,000 papers that were published that was enough to lead to the retraction of the 10,000 experiments. Like literally these 10,000 published articles were retracted. It's crazy. So lots of skepticism about hypnosis only to the uninitiated. There's actually a mountain of evidence, but public perception, a lot of skepticism. I agree. You had a session, and wow, look at that. It's been years and the effects are still here.
Yep. So
yeah, I'm not sure if that was one of us or someone else, but that's why we're doing this. We don't see anything with the exception of psychedelics, which can do both good and bad, tend to do more good. Just be careful. Do it legally. But with the exception of psychedelics, we haven't seen anything else as powerful as what we're doing. And what we do is safer. Love you too, my man. All right, bro.
You know, the worst that could happen with us is you fall asleep and we just wake you up.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Mr. Long. And yeah, there are other people out there doing great work with hypnosis. We do more than just hypnosis. We also cover self-talk and some other cognitive methods, but hypnosis is where we get the best results. We work on giving people awareness more than your average hypnotist, much more actually, and that actually kind of supercharges our ability to help people. But there are some high-level hypnotists doing amazing stuff.
Yeah,
there absolutely are, and sounds like you found one. I would say the hypnotists I know, 80% aren't that great, but there's a small percentage that just are absolutely amazing. So, and obviously we are big fans of hypnosis overall. Okay, so we're gonna go to the thank you guys for all your comments. Looks like this is a topic people are passionate about. I had someone on my school platform, you can see it right down there, the RyanFowlerSOS.com. Nope, not that one. It's the other one that's going to come up on the banner. He sent me a message, and it was like a 3-page message about this topic. So people are passionate about this topic. There you go. School.com/RyanFowlerSOS-7231. So if any of our watchers want to try this out for free and actually get benefit, I mean, we've had people, again, I'm not making any claims that we cure this. I'm just telling you what happened. You can watch our video interviews. We had guys 9 out of 10 anxiety approaching women, guys depressed, guys procrastinating, and they follow our free program and actually fix that or mitigate it to a great degree, even the free program. So the free program is very basic. It's do it yourself, but it has enough in there to really help you. So if you not just give you information, oh, that's nice, but actually help you feel better, do better. So for you guys that want to try this out, try the free program, school.com platform. It's in the banner down there, my specific site. Join for free, go to the classroom, try it out. You just may change your life. There are some people that need one-on-one though. So the do-it-yourself doesn't work for everyone, but it works for a lot of people. So give it a shot. So moving on to the next clip, and then we'll get, man, all right, I'm going to go as fast as we can. I want to get all this done. We'll see. Here's Dr. Ryan Taraban. So this guy, I like him because he tells the truth. And there are a lot of good psychologists. Man, I don't know about psychiatrists. There's a few good ones, but psychiatry is so inherently corrupt, in my opinion. I think there are a few good psychiatrists that try and stay honest. It's tough, though, because all they do is prescribe. So I'd say the level of corruption in the psychiatry industry is just sky high. I'm sorry, but I gotta call it as I see it. There's a few good ones. There are a few good ones. This guy is a PsyD. I think he's great. His channel, Psychax, you see it there. Watch his stuff. He's going to outline, so SSRIs, which is Prozac and, Paxil and all this other stuff that came out after Wellbutrin. I mean, there's Zola. I think Zola, I'm not sure. But the SSRI is the main antidepressants that they've been prescribing since, late 80s, early 90s?
Yeah.
Multi-billion-dollar industry. He's going to talk about the scientific foundation for this, and basically there pretty much is none. So just more signs of fraud, and then we'll get into the Matt Walsh comment. It's probably 2 minutes. Here we go.
You're probably familiar with some version of the monoamine hypothesis, which I have previously discussed on this channel. The monoamine hypothesis is the theory that depression is caused by an imbalance in certain brain chemicals like serotonin. And if this were true, it would make sense to recalibrate the balance of these brain chemicals using pharmaceutical interventions. Now, many people don't know that this hypothesis was actually recanted by its originator decades ago due to a lack of evidence. To quote the largest meta-analysis ever conducted on the topic, quote, the main areas of serotonin research provide no consistent evidence of there being an association between serotonin and depression, and no support for the hypothesis that depression is caused by lowered serotonin activity or concentrations.
FYI, there never was any evidence. This wasn't an experiment that couldn't be reproduced or a finding that couldn't be reproduced. There never was a finding supporting this. It was always only a hypothesis, the serotonin imbalance in the brain. And it led to a multi-billion-dollar industry with no evidence. That's how corrupt the mental health industry is. Let's keep going.
Link to the full study in the pinned comment. Note that the finding was no association, which means the meta-analysis failed to identify even a correlation, let alone a causation between serotonin levels and depression. What's more, antidepressants that manipulate serotonin have a terrible track record in randomized controlled trials when compared against an active placebo. And why aren't these findings more widely known? I'm not sure, but I doubt.
These are still being actively prescribed today by psychiatrists. What the hell? We'll keep going.
It could have anything to do with the fact that there is an entire rationale for a multi-billion-dollar industry that is predicated on the validity of that hypothesis. But I digress. The point here is that antidepressants are one of the inevitable consequences of considering depression to exist in the brain of the depressed individual.
All right, that's enough for that. We got the good stuff, which is multi-billion-dollar people who go to medical school are trained to be scientists, trained to think scientifically, logically, rationally. Oops, I just accidentally closed a tab on the Matt Walsh clip. I'll have to bring that up again.
I can pull it up.
If you can bring it up, I'd appreciate it, Jordan.
Yeah, sure.
So, but here's the thing. So, multi-billion-dollar industry still prescribing this medication, and there's never been a shred of scientific evidence that it has any efficacy whatsoever. It's not an experiment that was later disproven. It was a hypothesis that never had any supporting evidence. That's our scientific community. And I get a little fired up and pissed because I've been through this system and I've known people who've suffered, including myself, and have gone through this bullshit. It's ridiculous. I want my money back, damn it.
And your time. And your time.
1,000 plus that I've spent on this bull crap and I was lied to.
Now, let's also, Ryan,
go ahead.
Let's reorient the word hypothesis.
Yeah.
It's a scientific word for guess.
Yeah. Conjecture.
I'm guessing.
That's it. At best, that's what you can call it. An educated guess at best. Thank you, the new next. Thank you, Mr. Wrong. Great comments. Ryan Harrison. I remember being taught my whole life that some weird brain imbalance ran.
I've heard that a lot.
Garbage. And yeah, Ryan, he's been nice enough to do a video interview. We've gotten Ryan quite a bit better. And correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan, but I believe in your video interview on our YouTube channel, the video section, you mentioned you did therapy and it did very little, if nothing, for you. So there is psychotherapy can help about half of the people to some degree. Yeah, tons of side effects to a lot of these medications. And Matt Walsh is going to go into that. But this is a mental health industry that we're dealing with. If some scientist somewhere makes a hypothesis, the pharmaceutical industry says, oh, let's go with it. Let's make a ton of money. And then these psychiatrists who go to 4 years of medical school after college, do an internship, residency, all of that, they just follow it. They just do it with no evidence. That's our system right now. And they ought to be ashamed of themselves. They honestly ought to be ashamed. But hey, they're making $300,000 a year, or whatever they make as psychologists, some more, some less. So why should they care if it actually helps you or not, right? Well, let's, placebo. Well, just take placebo, and then you won't have the side effects, the weight gain, all the other dysfunction. I almost flunked out of college because of the effects these antidepressants had. I didn't flunk out of college because I went off the antidepressants, and then I could think straight.
I'd like to clarify too where the problem lies, and this is why I'm not to get too political, but this is why when RFK Jr. says, I'm going to get rid of all these big pharma lobbyists out of the FDA. I mean, why do you think this is the standard for prescribing? It's because these pharmaceutical companies are in bed with the government who sets these rules. And so it's like, do they care if it's effective or not? It doesn't matter because they get their paycheck either way. And so RFK removing these people, that's why you have to shrink the size of government overall, because otherwise and because the thing is, this is only one industry. This type of corruption permeates. I mean, we could go down the list of all this other corruption that exists, and it's all stems from the power of the government. So anyway, I have the Matt Walsh clip pulled up if you're ready to go.
Yeah, let's go ahead and go to that. So it's about the 2-minute mark. It's right after his early commercial. It's about 2:15 or something. Harder.
So it automatically.
Yeah, so that banner on the bottom, just scroll till that disappears, and that's close enough.
Past the opening.
Yeah.
Risk of angering all the people who will scream from the rooftops that correlation doesn't equal causation, like it's some kind of scriptural edict. Here's some data that's worth considering. From 1980 to 2020, the share of male teachers in both elementary and middle schools declined from 40% to less than 20%. Men have mostly stopped teaching young children in school. And during this same period, as men have abandoned elementary schools, there's coincidentally been another major change in childhood education. Everyone's being diagnosed with ADHD. More than 21% of 14-year-old boys in this country now supposedly suffer from this condition. The number goes up to 23% for 17-year-old boys. And as a result, prescriptions for drugs like Ritalin and Adderall have skyrocketed. From 2012 to 2022, the total number of prescriptions for stimulants to treat ADHD increased dramatically by nearly 60%. And boys between the ages of 10 to 14 were the demographic that saw the highest increase in these prescriptions. Now, for decades, you've been instructed to believe that there's no significance to this correlation whatsoever. As women increasingly entered the workforce and replaced men in teaching jobs, we're not supposed to draw any conclusions about how the behavior of male children is now being addressed. The truth we've been told is not that a feminized education system has increasingly punished normal male behavior that it doesn't understand. It's not that schools have lost their capacity to educate male students. It's not that smartphone use and electronics in general have become distractions, which teachers have been unable to control. Instead, we've been led to believe that, in truth, boys have suddenly become afflicted with a severe and mysterious psychological disorder. There's no objective biologically based test for this disorder, nor can anyone point to a specific gene or pathogen that might cause it. But the scientific consensus for many years now has nevertheless been clear. ADHD, they've said again and again, is real. And the way to treat it is to give children speed in the form of drugs like Ritalin. Now, as I've said repeatedly all this time for well over a decade, the science behind the theory of ADHD isn't simply underbaked or inadequate. It is comically useless to the point that it is obviously fraudulent. The whole thing is a fraud. And to give just one of many examples, a few years ago, researchers at the University of Central Florida conducted a grand experiment where they put a child in front of a computer, and here's what it looked like. You could see it there. The researchers showed a child two separate videos. One of the videos was about mathematics, and it involved a teacher talking about basic addition, subtraction, and multiplication. The other video was the pod racing scene from Star Wars. And as you can see from the videos, the child became bored during the math lecture. He starts spinning in his chair and fidgeting. On the other hand, when the child is shown something more engaging, he suddenly stops fidgeting. He's actually paying attention to Star Wars. He was not paying attention to the math video. Now, unless you're an alien who's never interacted with a child and was never a child yourself, there is nothing remotely interesting or surprising about this footage. It's exactly what you would expect a normal, healthy child to do. But in the academic world, which exists to sell pharmaceuticals to children, this was a groundbreaking experiment. The footage was the basis for a peer-reviewed article in something called the Journal of Abnormal Child Psychology. Abnormal Child Psychology. And the University of Central Florida bragged about their findings with this headline: ADHD kids can be still if they're not straining their brains. Their conclusion was that ADHD is a nefarious disorder that's only triggered by cognitively demanding tasks, and that we need to be vigilant of ADHD whenever children have to use their brains in specific ways. Now, in reality, of course, the University of Central Florida had simply discovered.
I just want to point out that I watch a lot of science shows, not just psychology, different scientists discussing different things. Physics, I watch a lot of physics, quantum physics, other types of physics, astronomy, not astrology.
Astronomy.
Astronomy, how our universe works, all of that. Origin of life, biology. I'm just like that. I'm always learning this stuff,
Just curious.
Yeah. I that's just the guy I am. Like I wrote a book with a law professor and have no law degree. Right? So with my old job and doing what I do now. And I learn a lot from watching these shows. There's a lot of great stuff out there. There really is. But man, there are times where my BS detector is just going through the roof when scientists speak, where they're just phrasing something a certain way and their bias is just like ridiculous. And this is one of those examples. It's like, yeah, it's a kid fidgeting because this is boring as hell for him. And you're saying he has ADHD. I think this proves he doesn't have ADHD. It's like you put something in front of him that he likes and all of a sudden he focuses. That proves he doesn't have ADHD in my book. Instead, they're spinning it. And you actually see this kind of a lot in science. Like, I love how I heard Neil deGrasse Tyson say, there's no evidence of that the aliens exist. Why is that? And then the very next video I watched is the U.S. government releasing footage of all their Navy jets seeing these UFOs, and it actually targets them. They look like these little white Tic Tacs. And then they have these, these Navy fighter pilots and Air Force fighter pilots talking about how they've seen them. And then you see these science. There's no evidence. Where's the evidence that they're aliens? And it's like, dude, literally, they're talking in Congress about it right now, and all these whistleblowers are coming out. And, does that prove that UFOs exist or that alien life exists? I don't think it quite proves it. But to ignore it as not being evidence, are you kidding me? I just can't believe. I don't know whether there's.
You at least have to do evidentiary analysis.
Yeah. What do you guys think? Do you think they're just arrogant and they're like, well, if a scientist didn't discover it, because they do this with hypnosis. Like science is actually, experiments have actually proven hypnosis is better than CBT. It's been proven, right?
So Ryan,
ignore it.
To answer your question, it depends on who's talking when and in what context they're referring to. Yeah. So if I were a scientist and I physically had not seen actual evidence of some alien thing or something we couldn't explain in front of me, I might make the statement, there is no evidence. Now, just because some guy saw something in the sky is not evidence, but we should at least pursue what that thing was and discount all the normal things we think it might be until we narrow it down to something that we really can't identify or know what it is. That doesn't make it evidence. That certainly makes it something that we're not sure what it is. Now, I saw this example of this guy who's a big friend of mine, and he's really into the UFO alien world kind of thing. And he has very odd things happening in his sky in Northern California. And he showed me this video and he goes, what is this? Well, because it was a light in the sky that was moving around funny around this beach, I didn't know if it were a drone light, if it were somebody screwing around. It certainly wasn't fireworks. I could tell that. It certainly wasn't a general aviation aircraft. It certainly wasn't a military jet. So I could rule out a number of things.
Yeah.
But that an alien, and it doesn't mean that it was an alien.
Yeah.
was just
Well,
something
evidence
that I
evidence
couldn't
is not
explain.
proof, Tim.
Correct. I understand, but I'm
So
just saying
to not even acknowledge it and pretend like it never happened.
I didn't say that.
Yeah.
I didn't say that. What I said was I couldn't prove whether that thing was an alien, but I also could not prove that it was not an alien aircraft. I just don't know. And until it lands in my lap and I go, wow, that thing's really hot from the nuclear generator. It must be an alien aircraft. Then I wouldn't know. I would just be guessing.
Yeah. Good comment here from Mr. Wrong. He's the one that sent me the message on school. And Mr. Wrong, you did send a lot of good information, which I really do appreciate. So keep the good comments and messaging coming. And so Mr. Wrong does have ADHD. Mr. Wrong actually in his message to me did say a lot that I it's like, yeah, I'm getting it, my man. My brother, I have a brother with ADHD, and he doesn't like what the medication did to him. Matt Walsh is going to get into that.
My thought, I wanted to comment on the Neil deGrasse Tyson stuff. I do think he is. I've heard many people, they just love to use this statement of, well, there's no evidence. It's like, well,
right.
It's like, but
that doesn't mean it's not true. It means you don't know. All you're doing is professing ignorance.
Yeah,
saying I'm
right.
ignorant.
Exactly correct.
That's what you're saying when you say there. And I remember Mark Zuckerberg being interviewed in Congress, and he said there's no scientific evidence that social media has any adverse effects whatsoever. As if almost as if that proves it's not bad. It's like, no, that just means you don't know. That's all that means.
That's it.
And it's like, start gathering some evidence, buddy. It's out there, obviously, for social media. And
Ryan Graves talks about how I think the Navy pilots actually have debriefs. They see these UAPs
and the recorded footage
that they put them in their safety debriefs as something to watch out for.
Yeah. Yep.
And Neil deGrasse Tyson is like, there's no evidence. Okay, technically, aliens and UFOs are technically separate categories.
Yeah,
correct.
But to say there's no evidence, it's like, okay, there's no evidence of UAPs except for the fact that, we put them in our safety debriefs as something to watch out for. It's like, you can't, you're just ignorant if you say things like that.
Well, there's actually proof. There's actually they call them UAPs now. There's proof that there's UAPs. It's not evidence, it's proof.
That's correct.
What does it mean?
They are.
Unidentified aerial phenomenon, a UAP, or unidentified flying object. No, there's no evidence. It's been proven. They have these fighter jets targeting these objects, and then they record it on their internal cameras. So that's proof. Now, is that alien life?
Evidence.
No. Is it evidence of alien life? Depends on how you look at it.
Right.
Is it proof of alien life? No, it's not proof. So,
I just think,
we'll keep
back to the ADHD stuff. I just think people can use language to be intellectually sloppy oftentimes. And I think that you become it becomes very disingenuous especially because Neil deGrasse Tyson likes to think of himself as an authority on science. And he is. He's a great explainer of a lot of things.
And like many scientists, he has an air of arrogance.
Yeah.
Not all scientists are like that, but many do. I certainly, to me, he certainly seems somewhat arrogant. Maybe I'm just reading him wrong, but
certain ways he communicates certainly seem that way. But we'll keep going on the.
We'll keep going.
Thing.
Hey, no one's perfect. We all got flaws. So
it's our show.
I like them.
We can do what we want. It's our show.
Yeah. Discovered the concept that is known as boredom. That's all they accomplished. The kid was bored of the math video because a math video is boring. Every person on the planet would also be bored by a math video. It would be like discovering that children prefer ice cream to broccoli and then announcing that you've identified a major new psychiatric disorder. It's exactly like doing a study to discover that children are more excited about opening presents on Christmas than they are about doing their chores. And then concluding that there must be some previously undetected mental illness that's infecting every child on the planet. Now multiply this garbage study by about 10 million and you get the sum and substance of ADHD research over the past few decades. None of it is legitimate. It is all nonsense. And as a result, we've all been waiting for the moment when, at long last, the medical establishment and mainstream media will finally acknowledge that none of this science is legitimate, because when that happens, millions of children will be spared these damaging and grossly unnecessary ADHD drugs. And this week, belatedly, that moment has started to arrive, it would seem. So, the New York Times Magazine has just published a very lengthy article entitled, quote, "Have we been thinking about ADHD all wrong?" Now, it's important to note at the outset that this article is not the result of some new discovery in the field of ADHD. There has not been any new groundbreaking research. Instead, the piece is a collection of existing studies about ADHD. Some of them are dating back more than a decade, along with testimony from researchers who in the past were some of the leading voices promoting ADHD medications. And now these researchers would like you to know that they've changed their minds, because after thinking about things for a while, they've realized that they were completely wrong. Oops, sorry about that. You all have your kids on speed for no reason. Our bad. Now, the article opens by discussing a researcher named James Swanson, who conducted a famous experiment in the 1990s that tracked 3 groups of students over a long period of time. One group of students received drugs for their alleged ADHD. Another group received behavioral training, and then a third group didn't receive any kind of treatment at all. After a little over a year, the study supposedly showed that the kids who received Ritalin were doing a lot better than any other group. And this study immediately became a major national news story. It was sold as proof that Ritalin works and that ADHD is real. Researchers like Swanson became highly paid consultants for the pharmaceutical industry, shilling ADHD drugs. So, everybody was happy, at least everybody who's making money off of this thing. And that is in spite of the fact that even if the drugs really did improve a child's behavior or academic performance, that obviously in and of itself does not prove that he has a disorder. Okay, steroids improve athletic performance. If you were to do a study with kids who took steroids and kids who didn't, you would find out that the kids who took steroids, well, what do you know? They're performing better in sports. But that doesn't mean that a child who lacks athletic skill is disordered. Okay, just because a drug enhances performance, that doesn't make it a legitimate medication. But it turns out that these drugs don't even do that much. As the New York Times now admits, the researchers understood very quickly that their narrative was false. Quote, "As time passed, Swanson began to grow uneasy. He and his colleagues were continuing to follow the almost 600 children in the MTA study. And by the mid-2000s, they realized that the new data they were collecting was telling a different and less hopeful story than the one they initially reported. It was still true that after 14 months of treatment, the children taking Ritalin behaved better than those in other groups. But listen to this part. By 36 months, the advantage had faded completely, and children in every group, including the comparison group, displayed exactly the same level of symptoms." Swanson is now 80 and close to the end of his career, and when he talks about his life's work, he sounds troubled, not just about the MTA results, but about the state of the ADHD field in general. "There are things about the way we do this work," he told me,
go ahead,
"that just are definitely wrong."
So this is very common with drugs, medications, whatever. You take it, it's affecting you. Over time, your body adjusts. Very, very common. And I'm wondering, I haven't seen the data, but I gotta think to some degree this stuff could be addictive. Do you guys know anything? Because I mean, Ritalin is very similar to cocaine. Like these, when this is given out, the doses are much lower than their illegal counterparts when people use it recreationally. So we should point that out. And, you know, we should point out, hey, when you eat cheese, cheese breaks down in your body, creates opiates. So there's drugs and everything. But I'll say he was mentioning steroids, and yeah, steroids increases athletic performance, but it has been documented that it can and does cause heart failure. And there's actually a lot of bodybuilders in their 30s and 40s have heart attacks and die because of all the steroids they're taking. And I think Matt Walsh goes into the adverse effects of these drugs. But when I mentioned earlier that there was 100, there can be 100 studies done, and then 2 studies show a positive result, and those ones will get published, the other ones will get ignored. This is what the pharmaceutical industry does. You do a bunch of experiments. You're going to have some experiments where the results are outliers, just because the possibility there's some randomization in the effects. And then the outliers get published, but the reality is there was a bunch of similar experiments done where there was no result, and those didn't get published. The outlier ones do, even though if you look at all the similar studies done, there really is nothing there. That's a big reason why there is this reproducibility problem, is these outlier studies, which is just due to randomness. You know, you do 100 studies where the hypothesis is false, you're going to get a couple false positives. So that's what's happening here. And then they laid that one study. Oh, look, they're doing way better. It could be that. It could be a temporary benefit, but long-term, no benefit. And then what are the side effects? What are the downsides? You guys have any comments on any of this so far?
So to answer your question, does it do any good in the long run? Is it addictive, etc.? I would imagine that there's probably, and I haven't done any research on this, so I'm going to go look and do some Gemini searches and stuff, but I wonder if there isn't a social placebo effect eventually. You know, you got to take this because mom says
Possibly.
You're different, you're better, right? You may even feel better for a short bit, and then you'll delude yourself into thinking that you need this in order to be this person that other people want you to be. I just wonder how much of it is circled around subconscious trauma more than it is any actual biological thing going on in your body. I don't know. I'm gonna do some research.
That's an excellent point, Tim.
Yep. That's what I wonder. That's what I
go
wonder.
ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead. That's what I wonder.
Well,
But
what I was
I'm
going to
do some
say
research
is, you
on
know,
that.
I have a brother with ADHD, and as you know, my family background pretty traumatic, and I've often kind of felt that a lot of his erratic behavior was just trying to cope with the crap going on in the home.
Right.
Yeah.
You know.
Well,
but
we've
just
covered.
real quick, and then I'll let you go,
Yeah.
Jordan. And I have been with psychiatrists whereas they just want to diagnose you and prescribe as quickly as possible. They never run any tests to see if there is a chemical imbalance in your brain. You talk to them for 15 minutes and they prescribe you a drug. That's what they do. They don't do nearly enough investigation to see what the root problem is. They make an assumption. Oh, yeah, okay, you have these symptoms. Okay, well, it's going to be this. Let's give you medicine. And they,
or socially it's acceptable. My son's on Adderall. You kids, he's so much calmer now. And I think there's some of that, oh, let me go to that doctor and get prescribed.
Yeah. I do think, these drugs absolutely do have an effect, and maybe there is short-term benefit. It sounds like there is. I know Adderall. A lot of people who are not ADHD love Adderall because it helps them get stuff done. It helps them focus. Crystal meth helps you get stuff done too.
So does Diet Coke.
Yeah. I know people who've taken Adderall for a long time, and after a while, it just screws them up. Yep. They've told me that. So they're like, I wish I never would have started,
We covered Gabor Mate probably a couple of months ago talking about ADHD. I think he was on Rogan.
Yeah. I do need to read this book, Mr. Wrong. Sorry, go ahead, Jordan.
Well, he was talking about, and the Gabor Mate comment is what reminded me of it, that these people they were misdiagnosed with ADHD. So there's different categories of that now. Yeah. There's misdiagnosis. there's the drugs, the reproducibility of the actual treatments. And then there's just people who, what if you just have anxiety and you're constantly nervous and you're looking around, like you're having inability to focus because of, like, I think we kind of buried the lead here a little bit. Like the subconscious trauma can cause a lot of these ADHD symptoms.
Yeah. What if you have a lot of anxiety from trauma? Is that going to make you fidgety?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes you fidget. Is that going to make it hard to focus? Yeah. Trauma. I agree. And I do remember that now that Dr. Mate did talk about that.
I mean, they have something called generalized anxiety disorder, which I'm like, that's just, isn't it convenient that these so-called professionals can just give themselves categories to not have to think that hard? I mean, some of this just seems intellectually lazy. I mean, generalized. So if I have just anxiety all the time, that sounds so unscientific, and yet that's an actual diagnosis that you can.
Yes, generally you're an anxious person.
Thanks. Thanks for that. It's
sort of
really
like irritable bowel syndrome. If they can't figure out what's going on in your bowel, you just have IBS.
Yeah. Well, and I've been to over a dozen psychology professionals, couple psychiatrists, I think 3 psychiatrists, and how many of us have gone to a doctor? He's there 15 minutes and he's gone.
Yep.
They're not going to take the time. That's how, and then they charge us through the nose. It's a profit machine. Unfortunately, now a lot of medicine does a lot of good. I used to have a goiter in my neck. They took it out. That did a lot of good. I had a really bad herniated disc, really bad pinched nerve for 1.5 years, did surgery, fixed it 98%. I got a tiny bit of leg pain, probably 99%. That's modern medicine helping me. Is amazing. I'm so grateful for that, because I don't want a lump in my throat choking me and looking nasty. I'm glad it got removed. I'm glad I can walk around normally now. So I never want to crap on the medical or mental health industry on the whole. Mental health industry did help my depression noticeably. It took forever. What we do happens way, way, way more rapidly, way more deeply and powerfully, in my opinion, but did help. However, we got to call them out when we see problems, and when we see, and the corruption and fraud is so widespread now. Oh my goodness.
So I love Mr. Wrong's last comment.
Yeah.
Which one?
ADHD has a 74% heritability rate. That suggests it's biological. So does trauma. Trauma has about a 100% heritability rate.
Well, and that's the thing is, parents traumatize their kids, and then scientists just write it off as genetic. And it's like, well, you're not even considering how our subconscious mind works. You have to look at what's the environment they were raised in. And what happens is parents will traumatize the kids because the parents are traumatized. Now the kids have kids, and they're now the parents who are traumatized, who are re-traumatizing their kids. That's not a genetic factor, but it's often mistaken for one. Now, maybe it is genetic. I'm not saying it's not, but you can't just automatically, and to your credit, Mr. Wrong, I don't think you're jumping to that conclusion. I think you're kind of looking at the data you've read, and also I don't think you're necessarily going too far. I don't want to crap all over what you're saying. I think you have a lot of good info. But we do have to and Mr. Wrong, you're obviously well educated on this subject. I mean, you gave me a very thoughtful letter before we came on the podcast today about this particular subject. However, with trauma, we've seen this a lot. Like, we help people for a living, and we've seen a lot of just straight up trauma being blamed on other stuff.
Now let me show. Mr. Wrong made one last comment there. I want to comment on, because he's very curious about this. Wow, trauma has a 100% heritability rate. That is amazing. I'd love to read the research. I'm not sure there's much research being done, but let me give you an example. And this is not an anecdotal example. This is an example that I live with every single day. My wife was traumatized by her 2 parents. And if you look at her grandparents, they were also traumatized by their parents. So generally, it's pretty human nature that as you are raised, you raise those that you offspring, because you don't know any better. It's just the environment that you live in, and it's polluted water. It's all you've ever drank, and away you go. Now, Ryan, I've known him for 20 years now. 20 years ago, Ryan was a different person.
You knew me
And we
when I was
talked
screwed up.
and we got along well. I mean, he was generally functional. I didn't know he had all these particular
You
issues.
found me after 80 sessions.
Yeah, after
normal.
80. So he was a little bit less depressed.
Twice as screwed up before you met me, but I was still pretty screwed up.
Right. So Ryan broke the family tree. So when he has children with whatever spouse he comes up with in the next bunch of years, they're probably going to be a lot less affected by trauma than he was. My wife is now fixed, thanks to Ryan. Had one session. She started a business that I can barely even keep up with. And she's tried numerous times before, but her mom was a full-blown narcissist and her dad was an enabler. And then her dad would tell stories about how his dad acted at the dinner table, where he would just haul out and smack somebody that was near to him, or abuse them and make them do things, and just verbally abuse them, emotionally abuse them. So, yeah, absolutely, I'm saying it's anecdotal. And I even said that to start off with it, but it's scientific in my world, because my wife is a different person. And after 42 years, easier to live with, easier to get along with, all that kind of good stuff. And I still loved her throughout the whole thing. So, yeah, I don't think they're going to do much research on this, but many books have been written.
Well,
ask John Bradshaw.
I have something to throw in the mix. So, Mr. Wrong, there was a multi-generational study, very large study done of Holocaust survivors and how that trauma got passed on to their children. Well, they noted that, and they noted a lot of other stuff. I don't know the name of the study, but it's a very, very famous one. It should come up. It's just Holocaust survivors, multi-generational trauma. Do a search like that. It should come up. So there absolutely is studies out there.
I want to comment on I had a statement about, let me go back here a little bit, about whether or not trauma exacerbates the ADHD or if it causes it. The problem with these studies that we've been talking about is we're not controlling for whether or not that's going on. So what happens if you do have actual ADHD, but you do have trauma as well? So this is kind of a chicken or the egg thing. It's like, what came first? Is it the symptoms that are being exacerbated by the trauma, or is it, so, or is the original ADHD coming from your environment? And that's the problem with the diagnosis of ADHD, is it doesn't actually look at what might be causing it. And then you also go mix that in with poor science being done about the subject in general. And so you have to just better science needs to actually be done on these individuals. That's really, and
it's actually very difficult to do proper research because humans are just living their lives, and there are so many factors at play that scientists are not always able to account for. It's extraordinarily difficult. And so some studies, the scientists are trying to do it accurately, but especially when you're studying human behavior, there's so many factors. It can be really difficult to isolate and say this one thing caused that, when there's so many different factors at play in people's everyday lives as you're tracking them.
And that's even if you're not a corrupt scientist genuinely trying to do good research, it's difficult. So mix that in with people who, have nefarious intentions. It's just a recipe for disaster. Like, I'll give an example. Like, I had chronic rhinitis, like chronic runny nose, for as long as I can remember. And I've had 2 surgeries to try and address it. All these nose sprays, allergy pills, tests, like you name it, I've probably tried it. The only thing that's made my symptoms reduce by like 90% is switching to an all beef diet. Now I've subsequently added in a handful of other foods that don't seem to make me react that way. But I've had this argument with, certain other people in my life, like, well, there's no solid evidence that what you're doing even works. It's like, well, that's because it's hard to study this because people react differently. So you can extrapolate that example to the ADHD problem as well. And so, this stuff is hard.
Yeah, I think we got to play maybe another 10 minutes of the Matt Walsh clip uninterrupted. Hopefully we don't get punked by YouTube. But I want him to get to the part where he really craps on the psychiatry industry. So can you play it at 1 1/4 speed?
Yep.
All right. Thanks.
Speed.
Like the best is still ahead. This is
Quality.
going over, but this is really good stuff. So
Come on.
Wrong. Close quote. So in other words, now that he's 80, this researcher who played a vital role in the mass prescribing of ADHD drugs has no problem going on the record and explaining that the so-called science on ADHD is essentially meaningless. In the end, we're not correcting any kind of disorder in the brain. We're not providing a long-term solution to a medical problem. We're just giving children amphetamines, which have the predictable effect of artificially stimulating their brains so that they seem less bored while introducing a whole host of catastrophic side effects that we'll discuss in a moment. And like all drug highs, eventually it stops working and reality sets in. The quote-unquote top scientists are all admitting this now. It's not just James Swanson who's recanting his old research on ADHD. For example, in 2017, a Dutch neuroscientist named Martine Hoogman announced that she had discovered evidence confirming that ADHD is a real observable disorder that's reflected in human biology. She stated at the time, quote, "We confirm with high-powered analysis that patients with ADHD have altered brains. Therefore, ADHD is a disorder of the brain." That's what this researcher found with her high-powered analysis less than a decade ago. That was her statement. But now, this same scientist is admitting that her data showed something completely different. And so this is again from this week's Times article, quoting the reporter who wrote the story, quote, "When I interviewed Hoogman by email recently, I was surprised to learn that she now wishes she could have revised that statement. Back then, we emphasized the differences that we found, although small, but you can also conclude that the subcortical and cortical volumes of people with ADHD and those without ADHD are almost identical," she wrote. In retrospect, she added, it was not fitting to conclude from her findings that ADHD is a brain disorder. The ADHD neurobiology is so much more complex than that, close quote. Okay, so here we have a leading expert who claimed in 2017 that her research proved that ADHD alters the brains. And now, via an email with a New York Times reporter, she casually admits that her research showed that the brains of people who are diagnosed with ADHD and the brains of everybody else are almost identical. Now, to call this a walkback would be a massive understatement. These people are completely abandoning everything they've been saying with absolute certainty for years now. And yet, their research is still being used by believers in ADHD to support the theory that ADHD is a real disease, even though the actual researchers themselves no longer stand by it. To be clear, it wasn't just this one scientist. Dozens of leading experts pushed the idea that ADHD is a symptom of observable physical issues in the brain. They even published a consensus statement claiming that a single gene caused ADHD and that ADHD patients had less brain matter and less electrical activity in their brains. None of that was actually true. When they ran experiments to prove that this was true, they got the opposite result, but they pretended otherwise at the time. And that's what this Dutch scientist is now admitting to. It's impossible to measure the full extent of the damage that's been done to millions of young children as a result of this fraud. Here's just one metric citing the MTA study, quote, "Children who took Ritalin for an extended period of time grew less quickly than the non-medicated children did. By the end of those 36 months, subjects who had consistently taken stimulant medication were on average more than an inch shorter than the ones who had never received medication. Many of the scientists in the MTA group assumed this height suppression in childhood would be temporary, that the shorter children would catch up during adolescence. But when data was collected again, 9 years after the initial experiment, the height gap remained. Amphetamines can be powerfully addictive, and last year a study in the American Journal of Psychiatry found that even a medium-strength daily dose of Adderall more than tripled a patient's likelihood of developing psychosis or mania." So yes, we have drastically increased the risk of permanently destroying children's brains and bodies. We have given them drugs that are stunting their growth permanently, based entirely on junk science. And that's just what the New York Times is willing to admit right now. Give them another 20 years and they'll tell you all about the effects that amphetamines have on the heart as well. And all of this data already exists, of course. Like, it's all out there. They're just refusing to tell you about it. Now, to be fair, there is one study that the Times cites that is actually recent. Here's the groundbreaking insight that the new MTA study has uncovered. Quote, "Last October, the MTA group published a new study that explored how ADHD symptoms in MTA participants changed over the course of their childhood and young adulthood. In contrast to the categorical model of ADHD, you either have it or you don't, the researchers showed that for most subjects, the symptoms and level of impairment, in fact, fluctuated over the years, often quite substantially. Only about 11% of the children who entered the study with an ADHD diagnosis experienced the symptoms consistently year after year." Close quote. This is something you don't need an MTA group or a controlled high-budget study to realize. Any parent could tell you this. Anybody with common sense can tell you this. On this show a few months ago, I said this exact thing in the context of the ADHD debate. Just to remind you, here's what I said at the time. And if I could get parents to understand one thing, it might be this. Nothing is permanent. Everything changes. And they go through phases. And those phases can be intense. They could last for 6 days or 6 years. But either way, they won't last forever. So just to give you one example of the dozens and dozens that I could supply from my own life and my family, My oldest daughter struggled to read, hated reading for many years. From the age of like about 4, right around the time you first start reading, to right around 11. Getting her to read was like pulling teeth. And she had a very hard time with it for a long time. She was, for a long time, way behind her peers. And yes, as parents, we worried about it. For all this stuff that I'm saying about, give it time, it's not easy to do. I understand that. And so as a parent, we're worried and we're fretting. And we can't help but imagine a dark future where our daughter is 25 years old and can barely read. Well, then one day it changed. And now at 11 and a half, we can't get her to stop reading. I mean, she reads like 2 whole chapter books a week. I'm talking books that are 300 pages. Now, everyone, whether they have children or not, intuitively understands that children go through phases. We don't need to administer psychoactive drugs every time they go through a phase we don't like. And we all know that it didn't really take decades for leading scientific experts to come to this conclusion. They knew it all along, but they had a financial incentive to say otherwise. Only now that the situation has devolved into total absurdity, now that we're supposed to pretend that 25% of teenagers suffer from this diagnosis, are some of these experts finally telling the truth. And they're also finally admitting that, in reality, the cure for ADHD is simply doing things that are interesting. That's it. It turns out that, according to the Times, ADHD patients suddenly lost their symptoms when they started doing things that they actually like doing. Quote, a hairstylist told the researchers that her inability to concentrate in school vanished when she began studying hair. A young man who was training to be an auto technician said that in his new career, his ADHD was no longer an issue. Patient symptoms tend to improve rather than worsen during times of higher environmental demands, periods of more responsibility and busier schedules. Jobs or college courses that were demanding and interesting helped alleviate their symptoms. And as their symptoms lifted, they changed the way they thought about themselves. Close quote. So again, we're talking about boredom. That's what all this is. People who are bored. Imagine that. It turns out that people become bored when you talk to them about something that isn't interesting. It turns out that when you sit kids down in a structured educational environment, especially boys, you sit them down in a classroom with 30 other kids for 7 hours a day, 5 days a week, for 9 months out of the year, and you have them do busy work, they're going to get bored and they're going to get fidgety. Wow. Amazing. What a revelation. But they become more engaged when you talk about things they find interesting. This is the cutting edge of the science on ADHD medication. They're figuring out things that anyone with 10 brain cells could have told you a long time ago, and something that a lot of us did say a long time ago. As I've mentioned plenty of times, I have gone through this myself. I was a terrible student in school. I could have easily been diagnosed with ADHD if my parents wanted to go that route, which thankfully they didn't. But even though I couldn't complete a school assignment to save my life, now as an adult, I write the word count equivalent of like 2 or 3 chapters of a book every single week while preparing for this show. I also read all the time. I enjoy learning new things. I didn't when I was in school. What changed? What accounts for the change? Did my ADHD wear off? Well, no. For one thing, I grew older and became more mature and more disciplined. And for another thing, I enjoy what I'm doing now, and I'm interested in it. And I was not interested in school, so therefore I was less engaged. Like, it's not that complicated. But the medical field has treated it as if it's complicated for decades. This whole thing has obviously become something of a pattern in the field of modern medicine. In the last few years, we've learned, or at least those of us who hadn't been paying close attention, learned that the chemical imbalance theory of depression was a lie. Gender-affirming care was a lie. The claims about how lockdowns wouldn't hurt children was a lie. And now ADHD is a lie. At this point, you have to ask yourself, why would you trust the psychiatric industry ever again? They are lying about everything. They are constantly lying. And these are not lies of little consequence. Millions of people, especially children, have been hurt, often permanently. The only winner in this process, as always, has been the pharmaceutical industry, which has convinced millions.
Yeah.
There.
And then there's the whole SSRI thing that I also pointed out.
Yep.
And the reproducibility crisis. And it hasn't just infected, it's especially bad in psychiatry, psychology, the reproducibility crisis, but throughout science, they're having issues. And it has to do with how the reward system are set up, how scientists get funding, which they need to keep doing science, so it's a mess. What do you guys think? Any final thoughts or other thoughts?
Well, he's thinking.
Okay.
I don't believe that Mr. Wrong enjoys Matt Walsh.
Yeah.
and that's okay. I'm not like a fanatic of Matt Walsh, but I do listen to him now and again, because as we all know, even a watch with that stopped is right twice a day. So
yeah.
Just because
I think Matt makes a lot of good points.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that many people do. We just got to get lost. We got to be able to sort out their opinion versus the actual data, because sometimes the data does come at us wrapped with a lot of opinion. So it's important to wrap. And I think Mr. Wrong probably does a pretty good job at that. But I'm glad he's here. It really has invigorated the conversation. But
yeah, keep coming back,
you know,
Matt.
Yeah, nobody's right 100%. Nobody's wrong 100%. Even crazy people might utter something correct. Anyway, those are my final thoughts. Good topic. And again, not everybody doesn't have ADHD. I hate to use those exclusive terms like everyone or everybody, but there are some people with diagnosable things that need to be addressed. I just think that everybody else jumps on the bandwagon so they can be included. Anyway, those are my thoughts.
Like, bottom line, if you got to take responsibility for your own life, if you've got issues, like I was told by the doctor, by the ENT, is like, you're stuck like this. Maybe he didn't use those words, but he's basically like, there's nothing else we can do, you know? And here I am sitting here today, and I'm not waking up in the middle of the night because I can't breathe through my nose, you know, and I've got, you know, postnasal drip. So if you're struggling with, if you're working with a health professional who seems like they're not giving you the results you want, you know, take the responsibility for yourself and go find it. That's what Ryan had to do. That's what I've had to do. You know, don't take no for an answer. Like, there are solutions out here. We may be one solution for you. We may not be, but, you know, we can help with a lot of these. You know, we're not medical professionals, obviously, disclaimer, but, you know, if you find that the medical establishment has failed you on some of these issues with self-worth and self-esteem, you know, come talk with one of us. We can probably help.
Yep.
Yeah, and I love your story about trying a lot of different things until you found something that got your runny nose issues down. Here's a takeaway for me for this whole show is, number one, don't just accept what you're spoon-fed blindly. We're in a day and age where there's so much evidence out here that just trusting the establishment can get you hurt or killed. I'm not saying it will, but it literally can. You know, they're not always. I do believe the majority of medical professionals do want to help people. The one exception is I'm not so sure about psychiatry. Honestly, I'm not. I think I would say, okay, let me put myself in a psychiatrist's shoes. He just blew $500,000 on his education, and now he's in debt. And now he's stuck in a field that's based on corruption, and he only figured it out a year into actually doing it as a professional. So maybe he's stuck, you know.
And very possibly that person that went into psychiatry or psychology really had an interest in learning about the mind and helping people.
True.
But he goes through the mill of understanding, which is run by the pharmacological industry.
Yeah, and excellent point, Tim. And so I don't want to like just right out the box like condemn anyone, although I am really tempted to do with psychiatrists because I've been with them, and you know, I've had some prescribe me stuff, and it's just they are so tied with just you know, like the pharmaceutical industry. You know, those guys do a lot of good, but honestly, they don't care. This pharmaceutical industry just wants to make money, and if they end up killing and hurting a lot of people, they don't care. So some of their drugs do a lot of good, but I absolutely, yeah, I mean, they should go to hell. The pharmaceutical industry, yeah, you know, the guys at the top should go to hell. They're evil people. I'll absolutely make that judgment, but I don't want to. I'm trying to be fair and say, hey, we have an imperfect system. There are people in the system doing the best they can. But with that said, we cannot just blindly, I think it's so clear at this point. And if it's not clear, pull your head out of the sand that you just cannot blindly trust what you're told. And the reason I love your story, Jordan, about fixing your nasal issue is there's a lot of truth there. And this is what I tell people. And this has been my experience too. If something's not working for you, try something else. And guess what? You may have to try 10 things that don't work.
Yep. To
get to the 11th thing that does. But then the 11th thing works. It makes the other 10 things that didn't work worth trying. Be open. Be open to what we do. Be open to what others do. Search. Here's Mr. Wrong. Psychiatrist. Destroyed my life for years. Yeah, they put me on drugs that absolutely almost made me flunk out of school. And so I think I think the most corrupt profession I know of is psychiatry. I'll say it now. Again, I'm trying to take the position, geez, as a psychiatrist, you didn't figure that until after medical school. Now you have $500,000 in debt you need to pay off, and you're just kind of trapped. So I'm trying to take their side too. But the industry itself, psychiatry, incredibly corrupt. I'm not saying they never do any good. I think they do. But, man, they do a lot of harm too, in my opinion. So
sad to hear that, Mr. Wrong. Sad to hear that. Glad you're doing better.
Don't just accept what you're told. It's okay to try different things that don't work out, because oftentimes that's what you need to do to find the thing that does work out. That's how Tim knows me when I was in a lot of my trauma. How I got better is I tried a bunch of different stuff out and something stuck. I found this, and in less than 2 weeks, I was already massively different. It worked so quickly. So I had a lot to fix, but it started fixing me very noticeably, very powerfully, very rapidly. And you just heard the new Next did one session for him. He had all these major triggers, and he's going through life now. I did his session a week ago, and he's like, wow, I'm not getting triggered here. I'm not getting depressed here. I'm not getting angry here. I'm just feeling good and living life now. It's freaking awesome. So
I love it.
My honor and pleasure. Yeah, it's I've seen Jordan massively help people. I've seen Tim change people's lives, and it's probably the most fulfilling thing I know of. So we're on a mission.
Fun.
Yeah, it's awesome, because we have people who come to us and we see their suffering, and then it's gone like that. Now there's maybe 5, 6%, 7%, whatever we can't help. That always sucks for us. But 93, 96%, somewhere around there that we can. Oh, it's freaking awesome. So be willing to, if you guys are struggling, whether it's our solution or another solution, end of the day, you have more power than you know. You have the power to go out, try stuff, learn, grow, figure things out. And in the meantime, your struggles make you tough, resilient, strong, patient, compassionate for others who struggle. So there is a silver lining to your struggles, but keep looking for a solution. Be open, try things out, and don't let the establishment blindly lead you along a wrong path, which not always do they do that, but man, they sure do it a lot. And you don't need to be captive to that. Take your life into your own hands. You can do it, because you truly do have more power than you know. That's our show. Anything final, guys? I don't know.
Sir.
All right. You have more power than you know. That's our show. Thank you.